Good afternoon and welcome to Research in Action, brought to you by the Division of Research at Florida Atlantic University. Welcome to today's session. Before we get started, I wanted to go over a few logistical items. My name is Karen Scapinato. I will be the facilitator of today's presentation. While we would really like for you to be able to ask questions and answer your questions during our time, due to the number of attendees, we do not allow verbal questions. But if you hover your mouse in the bottom of your screen, you do see a Q&A button there. If you push on that, a little pop-up window will come up and you can type your question in there. At the end of the presentation, we will go through as many of the questions as possible in our time here. If we do not get through your question, don't worry, we will collect all of the questions that are submitted and will answer those offline and post them on our website together with a recording of this presentation. With that, it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Kate Detwiler. Dr. Detwiler is Associate Professor of Anthropology at Florida Atlantic University. Her research is really at the intersection between anthropology and biology, so her lab is actually situated in the Biological Sciences Department at Florida Atlantic University. Dr. Detwiler's research focuses on the evolution and conservation of African forest monkeys, and she even discovered a new monkey species. Today, she will be talking about her experience at the Gombe National Park in Tanzania, where Jane Goodall pioneered her behavioral research on chimpanzees. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Detwiler.
Hello, thank you. I'm going to set up my screen and we'll begin. Okay, so hello FAU community and listeners beyond. So it's exciting to be here today in a talk that I've never given because we've never had a reason to celebrate. This is 60 years at Gombe, and next week on July 14th will be World Chimpanzee Day, and it's also the day when Dr. Jane Goodall first went to Gombe to begin her chimpanzee studies. So I'm going to put my glasses on here so I can see everything that I want to. And what I would like to start with is these great photos of Jane when she was in her 20s and when she went to Gombe with the support and collegiality and vision of Dr. Louis Leakey. So Jane first went to Gombe with this grand project of observing chimpanzees in their natural habitat, for the reason that Louis Leakey was studying fossil human ancestors in eastern Tanzania, and he was looking at new discoveries of Australopithecus, of Homo habilis, and the skeletons were amazing, the stone tools were amazing, and Jane was out there with Louis and Mary Leakey, and the whole time that this was going on of studying the past, Jane and Louis, of course, were around the living ecosystem of the Serengeti of Olduvai Gorge. And it was here that Jane demonstrated to Louis Leakey her really exceptional observation skills and her incredible patience. And it was there that the seeds of this project were developed, and that was to go to Gombe and study chimpanzees to inform the fossil record of how our early human ancestors behaved. Because chimpanzees are humans' closest living relatives, and at that time, so little was known about chimpanzees and their natural habitat. A study had been attempted in DRC, and that was behind blinds, and little information was collected. And so Louis Leakey and Jane became very excited about the chimpanzees in Western Tanzania at the Gombe Reserve. And so Jane set out with her mother and her binoculars, her sneakers, and she was determined. She was determined to make scientific discoveries, and the world has forever been changed in terms of primatology and how we approach animal behavior science. So the purpose of my talk today is to give you a bit of the excitement that we're all, I think, feeling as we approach recognizing Gombe as being a 60-year long-term study of chimpanzees and all the legacies that we have about Jane Goodall, right? So we have her living primatological legacy, we have her activist legacy, and that is an incredible inspiration for hope for all of us, I think, when we see her working with the young people and inspiring in them this stewardship of nature. And we also see the real on-the-ground conservation legacy that Jane Goodall is building and has been for, at least 25 years. And that's something that I have seen really have an impact at Gombe. I first went to Gombe in April of 1994, and it was a time when Gombe was completely isolated from any forest in the region because of the human agriculture and the need for charcoal. So trees were cut down right up until the border of Gombe, and this was for the production of charcoal for fuel. And so in the 25 years since then, we have started to see restoration ecology in action. And this is, I think, one of the most exciting legacies, maybe they're all so exciting, of Jane Goodall's work, because the forest is coming back and the animals and the people are all able to benefit from this forest restoration. So with that, I'm going to move forward with my slides and my presentation. I look forward to your questions and further communications as time permits. Okay, so the 6 decades of Dr. Jane Goodall's work of discovery, innovation, and hope. And for me, you know, in terms of my childhood and magazines that were laying on the coffee table at my parents' house, of course, National Geographic was there, and we still have the first publication when Dr. Goodall writes her story about observing and discovering chimps at Gombe. And we learn quickly the names of these chimpanzees. So here you have Flo, the alpha female of the F family. And Flo was a remarkable chimpanzee. She was curious, she was confident being an alpha female, and very early in Jane's studies in the early 60s, I think it was 1962, that Flo followed David Greybeard into camp. And so Flo is a female that Jane had longitudinal records for until she died. And then Flo's daughter, Fifi, became even more famous, I think, in the public eye than Flo. And Fifi is a chimp that I knew, and I was always amazed when I came across her in the forest. And Fifi is in this picture here with her son Frodo, so that would be Flo's grandson. And I also knew Frodo, and I was actually terrified of Frodo because he grew up to be an alpha male that ruled with force. And when you encountered him in the forest, he was the largest chimp we've seen, or at least that I'm remembering. Probably it's locked in my memory, the size of Frodo, but he was an excellent hunter and an incredible chimpanzee personality, and he left descendants, of course, and we are tracking them now through the Gombe long-term data. So these early days of Jane's work were really critical because she made 2 discoveries that surprised and made a huge sort of paradigm shift in our scientific thinking in anthropology. And the first is the use and making of tools by chimpanzees, which Flo is demonstrating here in this image. She has a termite wand, and termites are clinging to the wand, and she's going to eat them up. So what we are watching when we see termite fishing at Gombe is we see chimpanzees looking in their environment, selecting sticks, selecting firm grasses that they then take, they manipulate, and very, very carefully they insert that wand into a termite mound, and then the termites cling on and the chimp extracts, and the termites are eaten. And this is actually really hard to do. I tried it again this summer. It's a challenging task, and there's several clever YouTube videos that we show our students of anthropologists trying this in the field too, to demonstrate the skill that is needed, even in this rather simple, but it's a definite example of tool use of termite fishing. And this example was so exciting to Louis Leakey and so exciting to the scientific community that it fueled the growth of the chimpanzee research for Jane. And so it brought in funding, it brought in more support, and in these early years, with these early discoveries, she built this vision of a long-term research station where chimpanzees would be studied into the future. There wouldn't be a gap in the data collection, and other animals at Gombe would also be brought into this research center so that new information and discoveries could be made about the Gombe ecosystem. So this is, where I'm going to kind of keep leading to it, but I didn't mention the other big discovery, and that was chimpanzees eating meat. So Jane went out and actually saw in those first couple of months that chimpanzees were eating, I think the first observation was a bush pig infant. And she saw this with her binoculars. She was careful to really figure out what was the chimpanzee excited about and eating. And then over the years, chimpanzee hunting has been studied in great detail at Gombe, and it's been studied at other sites. And it is a really interesting link to this meat-eating behavior, the sharing of meat prey, and this has been something that has fueled a lot of research projects moving forward. So what I am going to share now is that two companies that are working with spatial data, one is Esri and the other is Blue Raster, partnered with the Jane Goodall Institute and produced a ArcGIS Story Map. And this was just released, I think, on the Jane Goodall Institute website at maybe the end of June, but it was done in celebration of Gombe 60. So I'm gonna link with you all here if it works, but what I wanted to highlight is the amazing image work that has been done at Gombe since the beginning, and how this has brought in all of us, right? So when we were either, children looking at the images, or scientists participating in one of Jane's presentations when she went around and gave lectures about the discoveries as they were happening in the field, the images were so compelling, and they told the story of these chimpanzees that Jane was observing in their natural environment, which was a whole new way of studying animal behavior. And it was this individual approach that Jane took of learning individuals, naming them, and then wanting to follow them day after day to see how their lives changed. And so this website provides, I think, an excellent and a really useful website to learn more about the Jane Goodall Institute and what her living legacy is all about. So it goes through this summary, and my excitement was very high when I saw this photo, because this is Mary Nkoronigwa, who is a Gombe Stream Research assistant, and she first came to Gombe in 2004 when I began my PhD work. And Mary was friends with Dr. Anthony Collins, who has been the director of Chimpanzee Research and is now the director of baboon research. And when we arrived fresh off the plane with a PhD proposal in hand and several hypotheses that I needed to address and collect data for, there wasn't time to run camp and do my laundry and do my cooking. So Mary came on as camp manager. And so it was in this relationship that Mary and I became friends. And then more importantly, Mary became very curious as to what I was doing. So I'd come back at night, I'd tell her what I saw, I explained what I was doing, and she practiced using my binoculars. And sure enough, Mary said, well, let me go with you. I'm doing everything at camp so quickly. why don't I come out and help you? And so Mary became a field assistant of the Monkey Project. And it was here that she shifted her career from being a cook and a camp manager to being a field assistant. And this is something that has been, nurtured and has been developed since Jane Goodall arrived at Gombe in the 1960s, that the data collection is being done by a team of well-trained Tanzanians who are from the region. And this is a career for these naturalists, for these individuals curious in nature. And it's a career where there's a pension, there's retirement. It's a whole new approach to what job do you want when you grow up. And this is, I think, a really exciting legacy that Jane has developed. And Mary went to the Chimp Project after I left for my dissertation, and then she returned in 2013 to lead the Gombe Hybrid Project again, and I'll go into that in a lot more detail. But there is Mary, our Tanzanian woman field assistant, doing behavioral research following the Jane Goodall approach. So we see next this nice award, and this is again to really celebrate and recognize the special distinction that Gombe has of being the longest running chimpanzee research site. So I think there are 6 other long-term chimpanzee sites throughout Africa, from West Africa to Central Africa and East Africa, and Gombe is the longest one. So Jane has developed a really excellent network of sharing publications, doing joint publications, all in this goal of improving and understanding chimpanzees as best we can. And this is something that I think has inspired scientists all over who do animal behavior work, because it's through these long-term records that we build up demographic information that we can then use to help conserve species by understanding how much space do they need? What is their home range? How territorial are they? How quickly can they recover from a disease or from a population decline? And this is through the demographic data that you can collect from long-term data, from long-term studies like the Gombe chimpanzees and the Gombe baboons. So that's an exciting distinction. So I'm going to share that. And then, of course, we have the iconic photo of Jane at night recording her notes from the forest into her more permanent field journal. And these actions and this process of record keeping is really, really tedious. And yet she was persistent and she recorded the data. And in the 80s, she published with Harvard University Press all the work that she had collected in her early years. And for me as a developing scientist, this is something I had as an undergraduate student, and I carried that book. It's really, really heavy. I carried that book around, and I was so excited every time I would go back to looking at the rainfall data or looking at the age at females when they first give birth. All this information that Jane had gleaned from her field notes that she had started in 1960. And this approach to data collection is ongoing at Gombe. We all use it, we all follow it, and we all have the tedious task of transcribing it. And when we collected it, it's in English, of course, but when the field assistants collect it, it's all in Swahili. So we all, we try our best. I learned Swahili as an undergrad. Jane learned Swahili when she arrived at I think the shores of Lake Tanganyika. And so we have that cultural exchange of the language that is used in this region, and how assistants are systematically timing their observations, recording it, and then it's later transcribed into databases. And this is how we extract the behavioral patterns that are so valuable in trying to understand a species in a temporal scale. So we, of course, then talk about Jane as a trailblazer. And this is an area that is really near and dear to my heart. She has been an amazing mentor, often a distant one, because she, of course, became an activist by the time I started doing my primatological research, but her influence was always very present. And the Gombe Stream Research Center has provided an incredible infrastructure with the chimpanzee data collection, the baboon data collection, and then when I started the new project of looking at the hybrid monkeys, I quickly fell into step of getting up before the sun rose, getting out into the forest, and then staying all day and coming home pretty much after the sun set. And so these all days in the forest, quietly and persistently following the animals that I study are not habituated, except for they are now, and I'll get to that. But it was these stories I had from my childhood of reading Jane's popular books, of reading her scientific publications, and understanding that it is through direct observation and through patience and through curiosity that you can get to really exciting discoveries. And that has been, I think in terms of one of Jane's gifts, one of the best gifts she has given so many of us who've joined the field of primatology, because her story is longitudinal too. Not only do we have the long-term records of the chimpanzees, but we have Jane's long-term story too, of how she pursued and made it through many barriers in science. And I think this is as valuable as the chimpanzee data. So with that, I can move forward. This is, of course, the chimpanzee data set that has been in the Gombe Stream Research Center since the 1960s, and the baboon data set has been there since 1967. And with that, we have a new cohort of principal investigators who are working at Gombe. And we've recently, through Jane's leadership, formed a Gombe PI consortium, which we are all in communication about projects and about students and about how we contribute to the running and the maintenance of the Gombe Stream Research Center, which is the core, one of the core pillar of the Jane Goodall Institute. So how can we help contribute? How can we help keep this research center thriving and moving forward with Jane's vision of a wildlife research center? So with that, we have researchers all over the world, and we have hundreds of publications that are out about the chimpanzees, the baboons, the monkeys, the ecology, the insects, the dynamics with the people in the region, with their agriculture, with the use of plants. And so this is the last large gathering that we had, and there was a large gathering, I think, planned for this summer, although that, of course, had to be put on hold. But here we have our last big gathering in Chicago, where Jane was honored, and it was a really exciting time to meet scientists who maybe I've only read their publications, and of course to reconnect with the directors who I've known since my project started in 1994. So with that, I'm going to transition back to my presentation and give you a little bit more in terms of the recent research that's been going on at Gombe and the project that I've been leading here at FAU. So we've got the Gombe Stream Research Center, which again was established by Jane Goodall in 1965 with this dream of it being a leading scientific research center for wildlife, and it has become that. It truly has. And when I was there with my field team in 2019, last summer, we had a phenomenal season, and I'm going to tell you a bit about the work that we did. But first, I want to share with you a little of the research station and some of the exciting discoveries that have gone on with my colleagues, the chimp researchers. So in 2016, Dr. Deus Mjungu, who is the PI of this NSF grant for a biological field station and marine lab, and it was a grant to improve the infrastructure at Gombe, and a new research station, a new building was set up. So here's Mary in the building working with our data set on the computer. Here's Dr. Dismas Mwacha, the wildlife veterinarian from the Jane Goodall Institute with the Gombe Stream Research Center, leading a necropsy of a blue monkey with myself and new Ph.D. student, Charlene Fournier. And this is the necropsy room. So we are now able to bring the lab into Gombe. And so this is going to open a lot of new doors for us, because we can collect carcasses of freshly new animals that just recently died, and we can bring them back safely into the necropsy room. And here we can, with the help of Dismas, the necropsy takes place. He will look for cause of death and collect specimens for histology and disease study. And then I'm able to collect organ specimens for genomic research. And so this is, as of December of last year, 2019, we now have our first high quality tissue samples that we'll be able to move into genomic research. So this is a huge advancement for us. And in the right here, you have Charlene talking to Anthony Collins, the director of baboon research, in one of the lab spaces. And what they are sort of, there's a tabletop, but all around them are freezers. And these freezers are run by the solar panels. And this is critical to doing research now on the health of the chimpanzees and the health of the baboons. So urine and fecal samples are collected routinely. They're brought back to the freezer. And then they are part of this long-term eco-health project that has been running for several years, that is being led by Dr. Elizabeth Lonsdorf and her colleagues, that she started when she was working at not the Chicago Field Museum, but the zoo in Chicago. So anyway, now Elizabeth is a professor and part of the Gombe Consortium. And what has been going on with the fecal samples is they're looking for parasites. And up until recently, they've been running a several year, at least 10 years study on chimpanzee SIV. So chimpanzee SIV is the precursor to HIV-1. And Dr. Beatrice Hahn from the University of Pennsylvania, she's been working with a team for several years to study the prevalence of chimpanzee SIV and to look at the consequences. And their discovery that there is associated mortality with SIV positive chimpanzees was really unexpected. It was thought that chimpanzees who were SIV positive did not develop the AIDS-like disease. And so this research, again, could only have taken place over a long-term data collection of knowing the animals, routinely collecting their feces, and then watching them and monitoring their health, and then doing the necropsy and looking at the histology and understanding the disease and the death. So this is a really exciting area of research that has been going on at Gombe for at least 10 years. And it was really important for the epidemiological research of HIV and primate SIV. So another study that has happened recently involves the dispersal and migration of females. So Jane has always had a strong interest in females, and this is a difficult area of research because females are often shy and they can be peripheral, and you don't always see them unless it's an alpha female who's a bit more confident and gregarious and habituates to observers. So we have the F family, which I introduced earlier, and here's Gremlin, the G family, the daughter of Melissa, who was a female that Jane studied early on. And Gremlin and her daughters, she had twin daughters, the only known twin chimpanzees to survive in the wild, and now Golden and Glitter have had daughters. And what a really recent study has shown that if a female is of a high-ranking, or the daughter of a high-ranking female, she may not emigrate at sexual maturity. So chimpanzees typically disperse out of their natal group when they reach sexual maturity, and the hypothesis is to avoid inbreeding. Yet if a female is related to a very high-ranking female, the benefits of staying around mom and, you know, using some of the shared core area that mom uses may be greater than the risks perhaps of staying in your natal group and mating with cousins or relatives. However, what the research showed was if you have several brothers in that social group, then the risk of inbreeding may be too high and you will disperse out. So it's a really fascinating story about the variation in female chimpanzee dispersal. And again, research that we wouldn't be able to even tap into without the long-term records. And so they're looking at, I think it was 35 to 40 years of long-term records of female dispersal and these other variables that are present in terms of number of adult brothers and the rank of a mother. So again, fascinating information about the sociality of chimpanzees that goes and links all the way back to that original goal of Louis Leakey of understanding our human ancestors. Did our human ancestor females emigrate out of a social group to avoid inbreeding? And were there conditions where it was plastic or it was more flexible? So this is exciting research that I encourage you to follow. And what I will now sort of talk a little bit about is how I have brought the Gombe Hybrid Project into the Gombe Stream Research Center, and how grateful I am for the open arm approach that Jane has had and the Jane Goodall Institute has had about housing this project. We have 2 full-time assistants, and we had 1 community member and his son, Dan Kane, who has contributed to the Henderson schools with the Kane Institute for Science and Technology. He and his son visited Gombe in our 2019 season, and they really had a fantastic time. And this brings me great hope for the collaboration that FAU and the Jane Goodall Institute can have, and the opportunities for research in the future through the Gombe Stream Research Center. So there's Jane sharing her wisdom with Mary, our now lead full research assistant, and our director, Dr. Deus Njungu, who helps to oversee the research throughout the year. So now about the hybrids, and I presented on the hybrids recently at the library series in the spring and at Frost Museum, so maybe you've seen some of these slides. But what has fascinated me about Gombe is this presence of hybrid monkeys and what comes of hybrid monkeys. Often they're thought to be an evolutionary dead end. And this fits into this much larger field of hybridization research. And this is a recent study about the discovery of hybridization in the past between the 5 largest cat species. So I identified them here for you. If we were face to face, I'd ask you to call them out. But what's so exciting about this research, you see the DNA molecule running from head to tail through this cat hybrid, is that we can trace through genomic studies genetic material that moves between species during these periods of sexual contact. When individuals from different species are mating, hybrids are born, and then hybrids are fertile and move genetic material back to parent species. And this is something like that scientists didn't think was happening in the 90s when I was starting at Gombe, and hybridization studies were just starting. And so since then, we've seen an explosion because of the advancement of looking at genomes. And we've been studying hybridization through the genomes in all different types of species. And so when I first heard about the hybrids at Gombe, I was amazed. Of course, I was excited to see the chimps and the baboons, but I was really taken by the hybrids. And I think this is something that scientists have seen at Gombe since the 1960s, and they have known there was something a little wonky with the guenons there, but the pressing questions about chimpanzee behavior and baboon behavior really became the priorities of researchers. And so the hybrids hadn't yet been investigated. So it was a perfect setting for a new scientist. And so when we think about hybridization in primates, we are often, linked or brought to recent research, again, sort of looping back to the paleoanthropology at the beginning, but what happened in our past when there were closely related human populations, or if you go further in the past with Australopithecus species, did they interact, and how do we know what that looks like? And so what you see in this slide is new research, again, through the genomes actually of fossil human populations, this ancient DNA work that's being done. And we're seeing movement of genes between Neanderthals and these early modern humans. And then there's even other lineages that are showing up in new research studies. And this brings hybridization research to another whole level that I didn't anticipate when I first went to Gombe in the 90s to study hybrid monkeys. So when we think about understanding hybridization that has happened in the past, we want to know a lot about the behavior, right? How does it even begin when animals of different species come into contact and mate? What are the factors that are conducive to such a mating? Because it's not common, it's rare. Species normally mate with members of their own species. That's how nature has this diversity that sort of is distinct. And so I've been really fascinated by studying the Gombe hybrids because it's in the present. It's a laboratory for hybridization, and this is now we're able to show the world these beautiful hybrids because we're starting to build up that photographic collection that Jane had of the chimpanzees. And it's really exciting to share with people outside of primatology just what a hybrid is and what our questions are. So we've got the great occurrence of baby hybrids, and that is really exciting because we know hybrid moms are fertile. We don't know if hybrid dads are fertile, and so we're going to be working on that question. But the group of hybrids at Gombe are very, very special because they belong to this group of monkeys known as guenons. And guenons are the most colorful mammals in the world. And so here's just a sampling of the different species of guenons, and there's more in the poster behind me, but they are remarkable monkeys. They're high in the trees, they're small-bodied, they move quickly, and they are prey. They're prey to humans, meaning we eat monkeys. They're prey to chimpanzees, they're prey to baboons, to eagles, to snakes. So they've got this position in the food chain that's very different than chimpanzees and baboons. So guenons only live in Africa. Their habitat overlaps a lot with chimpanzees and bonobos. And what you're looking at here is a map of all the overlap of their distributions. And what you're going to see in a minute when I show you Gombe is that Gombe is at the very edge of this sort of central location of guenons. And Gombe is tiny, and this is the smallest park in Tanzania. We have larger parks in the north in Rwanda and Burundi, and a much larger park in the south in Mahali. And these parks don't have hybrids, so they're only at Gombe. And it's really this like needle in a haystack. And I think Gombe's position in terms of where the elevation starts to come down right along the lake, and you see an ecotone, a transition from rainforest to the Miombo woodland, is really important for I think the factors that influence hybridization. So this is what the forest and the grasslands look like at Gombe, and in the valleys is where you see the monkeys, and they hunker down where the tall trees are. And the the hybrids are living there with their predators. The chimp and the baboons are more of competitors, and red colobus, which are flivores, they eat the leaves, but they're all in the same trees, and they're all hunkering down in this forest habitat. The parental species are red tails and blues. So you can see the red tail has different coloring and the blues are more monochrome. They have this dark gray pelage. And here's a quick video listening to the loud call. That's not a panhoot, and so I'm practicing my meow to give a public lecture as Jane gives her panhoot. But here's a blue monkey male in the tree with a red-tailed female and her daughter. And this is really unusual in terms of blue monkeys and red tails being in the same social group and mating. And so this is the project in terms of what is going on with the genetics and how do we look at the genomes knowing that we've got active hybrids. And so this is the exciting part that I talked about earlier. We also collect a lot of poop and we bring it back to FAU, and we're also planning to do extractions at the new lab at Gombe at the research center. And we hope in the years to come we can give a lot more information about what material is moving between the parent species. We're also really interested in the diet, and something that has come up with the early records of Jane Goodall and chimpanzees. She was fascinated by the diet. She studied the dung. She did lots of dung washes and found what the chimps were eating, not only from the binoculars, but from what they pooped out. And we're finding our hybrids and our blues and our reds are eating a lot of insects. And this is more than we see at other forests. So again, this unique ecotone habitat where insects might be very high at Gombe, and the hybrids may have this advantage of being able to break down and digest the insects. So we're going to look at this as a potential adaptation. And then the project that I'm going to start to wrap up with, but get you, I think, hopefully excited about maybe learning some monkey families. We have some eye families and we have some teeth families, but we're naming our monkeys, and we are now working with a group of about 60 individuals. And I'm working with Connor Kane, who is designing a machine learning program for us to move forward when we have these photographs. And we didn't, of course, know last summer that we would be having a very significant pause on our field research for quite some time to make sure that chimpanzees stay safe from COVID-19. But for right now, I am so grateful that we have Connor's AI program, and Charlene and the team last summer collected lots and lots of photos, and we will use these photos when we go back to the forest to make sure when we say we see dove that we are matching it to all the photos of dove that we collected from our summer 2019 season. So this is a huge advancement for us. And I just, as I was talking, flipped through the different monkeys that we have in the program that Connor Kane is building. And you can see these monkeys, their faces are for the red tails are really colorful. And we are learning to recognize them with our binoculars. But if time goes by and we are wanting to track them, this is going to be an excellent tool for us to reduce error. And our hope is we're going to bring this technology into other social groups so that we can increase our sample size and we can start to make interesting discoveries about female dispersal and hybrid females maturation, and how many offspring are hybrid females having and how successful are they. So we can't collect those data unless we follow the Jane Goodall approach of learning individuals, recognizing them through time, and then carefully recording all their major life history events. And so this is, I think, hopefully something we'll be able to contribute to the Gombe Stream Research Center in the next few years. So I'm going to end it with just that Jane Goodall has inspired me a great deal in thinking about conservation, and her work as an activist and her work as a conservationist, in addition to being a really pioneering and groundbreaking scientist, is that in the Congo, across Lake Tanganyika, from the hills at Gombe, we have another park that is really exciting, where it's large. It's about 9,000 square kilometers. And here you have up to 6 different guenin species living. And so I'm really interested in working with collaborators through the TL2 project with the Frankfurt Zoological Society, and they're working to maybe one day build a research station there for studying the bonobos and studying the of the monkeys. And so we don't want to habituate quite yet because hunting is a problem there, but we're using camera traps and we are using different tracking ways. And here's the new species that was mentioned at the beginning, and this is a guenin that lives on the forest floor. Most guenins are up in the trees, and this is a guenin that's on the ground with the bonobos. So we're really interested in its behavior and making new discoveries about its adaptations. This is known as the sula, the name that the folks who are living in this area have always known it to be as the sula. So wrapping it up, I think I've reached my time. It's tricky to know if anybody's out there, but I'm assuming you're there and wanting to, keep your schedules. So I just wanted to thank everybody who participated in the visit of Jane Goodall last year. She received 2 standing ovations, and for myself, who's always been sort of peripheral with Jane and seeing her in the forest when we're both alone and looking at monkeys and respecting her private time, it was a very public event for me and for Jane, and I was so appreciative of her recognition of the work at Gombe with the hybrids, and for her sharing this dream that she's always had of having a top class and this scientific research station that provides scientific knowledge to the world about these amazing animals that are living at Gombe. So we want Jane to come back. So Jane, if you're listening out there, please come back. And so she is an amazing mentor. She does so much wonderful work, and it touches all of us through her writing, through her actions. And I encourage you to listen in next week as she gives a lecture. I think it's a Zoom or a webinar, but you can find out on the Jane Goodall Institute. They're advertising it. She's going to give a talk on July 14th to recognize World Chimpanzee Day and the 60th anniversary of her very first days at Gombe. So thank you, Dr. Jane Goodall. Thank you, FAU and all the listeners. And I'm gonna say goodbye.
Thank you, Kate. Fascinating research, of course, and very interesting to hear more about Gombe and Jane Goodall's legacy. Just as a reminder to anybody who has a question, please submit those on the Q&A button in the bottom of your screen. We will go through as many questions as we have time, but we will offline answer any remaining questions and post them on our website. With that, I want to start us off. You mentioned how important it is to have these long-term studies. And that's really where the Jane Goodall Institute is stellar at, that we have this long-term studies. How old do chimpanzees and also the monkeys that you're working with actually get, and at what age do they reach sexual maturity?
Yes, so chimpanzees will reach sexual maturity typically in their early teens, so 12, 13, and that will vary, of course, depending on who the individual is. And they will, in terms of how long they live in the wild, there's a chimpanzee right now who's gremlins, I think she's 49, but maybe the early 50s, mid 50s. So that's the record, and they give birth typically up until they die. So that last infant will either not survive or become an orphan.
Okay.
And then for the monkeys that I study, they have a much shorter lifespan. They can in the wild live up into the late 20s, early 30s. And this work is being done by Dr. Marina Cords at a forest in Kenya, where she has had a long-term study, the only, I think, long-term study of these monkeys that she's been able to contribute to the lifespan data and the demographic data. And the guenins typically give birth for the first time at age 5 to 7, so much earlier.
Great. For the chimpanzees, you mentioned that the high-class females are staying home, so to speak, staying with their mothers. And inbreeding, have you found any hemophilia that are similar to like the royal families in Europe?
No, not that I know of. The females that are staying in their natal group, we know their related status with who they mate with, and sometimes they are mating with close relatives, brothers, or there's even been a situation where Fifi, her son Frodo, copulated with her, and the females are not happy about this, and so the offspring, looking at the survivability again, is going to be a question that the chimpanzee team will be able to address.
Yeah.
The cost to inbreeding, right?
Yeah, very interesting. We have a question. How do you differentiate between a male and a female? Are there any distinguishing characteristics of either one?
For the monkeys or the chimpanzees? The chimpanzees, it's so easy. The males have giant testicles because they have a lot of sperm competition. So if an adult male walks by, you can't miss seeing his testicles. And then for the females, they have these sexual signals when they are ovulating, when they're receptive. So their whole, their rear end, the vaginal anus area blows up with fluid and pink tissue. So you see this, what's called a giant swelling, and you can't miss that. So we are very lucky as humans not to have these external signals of ovulation. So we have what's called cryptic ovulation. But the monkeys, for adult females, you can see their nipples if they've already given birth, but as they're pregnant, their breasts fill in with milk, and then their nipples elongate, and they lack testicles, and they don't have a penis. So you can see that when they urinate. So we watch juveniles when they urinate. So if it goes in front of the branch, it's typically the male, and then if it trickles to the back of the branch, then it's the female. So
not unlike humans.
Exactly.
Somewhat related question. What distinguishes babies from adults other than their size? Is there any difference in color or length of hair? Any other markers?
Yeah, in this group of monkeys, I mean, for the monkeys I can speak to, but our red tails and our blues, the monkeys have their coat color, their pelage, typically at 1 month. So we can identify a baby as being of either the red tail species or the blue species pretty quickly. And they are about a quarter the size of mom. So they're little, and they're really dependent on mom. So mom doesn't park them really. She has to carry them ventrally. So she carries them on her tummy. So you can see this infant, especially in the first 3 months of life, where you really identify mom's given birth. And then the task is to track that baby. At 3 months, they start to get curious and they start to wander. They will even suckle from another mom. So you can get all confused in your observations when you see this infant who you thought you knew the mom, all of a sudden suckling from another mom. And so you've got to be really careful to track an infant as it's growing.
Very interesting. Could you speak a little more about the parallels with human anthropology and genealogy?
Human anthropology and like studying, you mean like our family pedigrees? Is that what you're asking, you think?
I guess, I don't know. This
yeah. Well, the chimpanzee work is really understanding pedigrees and these family dynamics, I think, if that's what the question's asking. And we've always done it through observations in the past, but now we're able to do it with genes, just like, we're learning, right? If you're a mom and you want to confirm paternity of your baby, you can now get a paternity test. So there is a lot of overlap there. And this is a side note, but the Chimpanzee Project is even using pregnancy dipstick tests to know when a mom is pregnant and to track all that. So there's a lot of overlap. I'm not sure if this is getting at the question, but we are constantly using technology and advances in human research, and we're applying it to the primates and vice versa. It goes both ways.
So somewhat related to that again, Are there any studies, are you aware of any studies that determine whether the monkeys are immune to any diseases that humans are not, or vice versa?
Yeah, the disease ecology and disease research, of course, has always been done in the labs, and there's several, cases where the monkeys, and a lot of the monkeys do carry SIV. So the monkeys that I study, there's over, I think, 50, strains of the virus in primates that they don't seem to develop AIDS or the sickness. And that's why they were so surprised when chimpanzees actually were showing morbidity and mortality with SIV chimpanzees. So this is the situation, right? So as people hunt them and are interacting with carcasses, an animal may seem very healthy and not necessarily look ill to the hunter, but then it can be a cross-species transmission because the animal is alive and doing well with the virus, but then once it gets into a new host, you've got that new host phenomenon where that immune system is not going to be able to respond to it, and it becomes a very serious, sometimes deadly disease.
Yeah. We have a question from one of the attendees that is not really related to your research since you're doing field research, but there are monkeys and chimpanzees that are used in medical research. Are you aware of any efforts that try and get away from using these species in that type of research?
Yes, it's now no longer legal to use chimpanzees in medical research. So Jane Goodall, very early, it was one of her goals to work with medical research labs and to phase out chimpanzees from medical research. So that is an accomplishment that we can, it's part of her legacy. Monkeys are still used. The species that we study, these guenons, are often in research labs, but the goal is that as we can support and develop more of these research stations in the field, we can bring the labs to nature, and we don't have to bring nature into the lab. So we don't have to bring these really emotional, very intelligent animals into a lab and test them and see how they respond to diseases for human care. And so I think great advances have been made in the last several decades to really reduce the research on primates.
That's fabulous. Coming back to your research, and you spoke about your research on the hybrids. We have a question on whether the second generation hybrids are fertile, whether the male or the female. You mentioned a little bit about the fertility of the offspring. Are the second generation fertile?
So for females, for sure, we think the females, we have yet to figure out what the consequence is of hybridization for females. With males, we think there is a consequence. So we think males may have reduced fertility. Whether they're completely sterile, I would be surprised, because I don't think nature works often in black and white. But I think there's going to be some male genotypes or genomes that are not going to be compatible for making sperm, and some will. And so we're hoping, like, we have our first PhD student ready to do that, and she even brought some sperm back. So not that I think we can do anything with it, but we're trying to get more and more creative with understanding what maybe the consequences of hybridization are. But so far, it seems to be a really novel evolutionary phenomenon going on at Gombe, and maybe will inform us of where species come from. Can you get a new species from a hybrid?
Right. Okay, we're almost out of time. We have a number of more questions. So if we didn't get to your question, don't worry. We will be answering those offline and posting on our website. I'm going to finish us off with one last question. How do the monkeys react to humans? When you go, you mentioned you need a lot of patience, right, when you go out in the field. But how do they react to you?
Yeah, this is a great question. When I was doing my work alone, when I was just starting out, I didn't have a team, and I was by myself in the forest. I was able to be very, very quiet and interested in them. So really following Jane Goodall's approach, where you start playing with leaves, or you try to tell them you're not at all interested. Once you look at them and they see you looking at them, it's all over. So they're really paying attention to you. And if you seem to be disinterested, then they can be more relaxed, but once you start watching them, they alarm call, they flee, and it takes several months to get them comfortable. So the monkeys now know our research team, and they know we're not chimp researchers. Remember, chimps hunt the monkeys. So if the chimp researchers are out with the chimps, the monkeys are afraid and they chirp. But when we're there, they know that we're not with the chimps. So it's this, you know, they're so smart. So they figure it out. And it's harder for me now because I have these great pauses where I'm not with the monkeys. But Mary and Meneno, the field team, they're with them and the monkeys know them, and they're able to relax and know that there isn't a predator associated with them.
Great, wonderful. Sounds very exciting. And with that, I thank you, Kate, for your time today. And again, we will be posting the recording of the presentation along with the question and answers on our website.
Thank you for hosting. Okay, great. Thanks, Karen. Okay, bye-bye. Bye-bye.